Hello, and welcome to everyone listening to the Written Melanin Podcast, the place where you come to get your weekly dose of melanated creativity. I'm your host, CM Lockhart, an author of fantasy books featuring Black girls who aren't all that nice, and the owner of the Melanin Library, your online database of books written by Black authors. And in this space, I invite you to listen to the journeys of Black authors with the hope that you'll gain something from it. I am glad that you are here. And today, you guys, I am here with Didi. She is a nonprofit founder, president, executive director of the Writing School, a master teacher, and novelist residing in Los Angeles, California. She earned her MFA from University of San Francisco in 2017. She recently completed a Master of Education in Private School Leadership from Teachers College at Columbia University and will start a dual PhD program in the fall. When she's not teaching English and creative writing, Didi spends her time traveling, rereading her favorite books, dancing to Beyonce, and playing The Sims 4. And she is on the podcast, and I'm so excited to have her here. Welcome to the podcast, Didi.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you. Shout out to the Written Melanin audience.
Hey, they're the best audience in the world, honestly. But that being said, since this is your first time on the podcast, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your books, Descendants of Fire and Water and Wilders of Floods and Flames.
Yeah, so my name is Didi Anofienem, as Chelsea introduced. I am originally from Houston, Texas, and currently living in Los Angeles. I love to read. I love to write. I think I became a writer because I was first a reader. I have spent the last 20 years as an educator, as an English teacher, helping students to learn to love reading and writing as much as I do. I've worked with grades from like kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade, college level. So education is like the other half of my heart. I started writing when I was 8 years old. I published some like romance novelettes on Amazon, and they did okay. And then I was fortunate enough to get a two-book fantasy book deal. And that kind of just catapulted me into being a published author. So now I kind of spend my days balancing between running my nonprofit, which is providing literacy instruction, literacy programs to students in Los Angeles County, and working on my own art, different series. I have like 7 different work in progresses right now. Who knows if they'll ever see the light of day.
I mean, I feel like every author has like their main project that everybody knows about and talks about, but then it's just like behind the scenes, it's just like, y'all, there's a lot happening back here. I got this project, I got that project. There are so many things that I'm working on. So I understand that energy 100%, 100%. But that being said, before we get really into your publishing journey, I want to ask, like, what got you into fantasy? Because right now in this big old age of 2025, romantasy is like king in the literary world. Everything is romantasy this, romantasy that, right? And you mentioned starting out with, romance novelettes. So what kind of made you jump from writing romance to writing fantasy?
Yeah, so 2 of my favorite authors, Octavia Butler and Laurel K. Hamilton, I started reading them when I was like 12 or 13. So that's kind of been like the backdrop of all my reading, like creating fantastical worlds, creating worlds from nothing, bringing in the supernatural. So I've always been a reader of fantasy. And then when I went to the University of San Francisco for an MFA program, that was where I started to experiment and like play around with different forms. So I tried all the forms. Like I tried historical fiction, I tried poetry, I tried memoir. And then that kind of led me to like, I really like writing fantasy. Like it feels like really like I'm creating, like I'm building something from nothing when I write fantasy versus like, I feel like with romance, like you're using the world that we live in to create and like the structures that we already have versus fantasy, you get to like build from the ground up. And that was like really, really exciting for me. And then
I understand that.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just agreeing with you. Like I 100% understand the appeal because I had a similar path where I wrote one romance novella and I put it out in the world. I was like, oh, that was fun. Never again. And then I pivoted to fantasy. And it was exactly what you're saying, like being able to build a world and be able to play by your own rules and not necessarily have to confine your story to oh, this is how things actually work, or these are the things that you have to consider in the real world. And it's just like fantasy. When you really want to tell a story, you can focus on it and you can build the world around the story that you're trying to tell versus trying to shape your story to the world that already exists.
Exactly. I love world building. When you say never again for romance, like, do you mean like you'll never write or put out a romance again? Because I would.
I mean it in the sense of like, I enjoy the romance element. So I am like my current working Project Necromancer, does have a very strong romantic plot to it for both of my main characters. So it's in there, but at the core of what it is, it's still like a fantasy first. It's about the world building, it's about the adventure, it's about the growth and the arcs. But part of their individual growth as characters is that they do fall in love and they do have these relationships. So it's more of a subplot, even though like a bigger subplot. I would say it's a fantasy romance, not a romantic fantasy. You feel me?
I feel you. That makes sense. Yeah. I like romance as a subplot versus like being the plot.
Yeah. Like fall in love on the adventure, but I also need y'all to be doing something else because of me. I love a good romance, so I'm not bashing that at all. But I'm also like the things that I really, really enjoy is I love the adventure. I love like we have something that we're trying to accomplish. We have a larger goal. And in the midst of us spending time together, being on this adventure, going on this growth and growing as people, as individuals, we're also seeing each other and growing together. And by the end of it, it's like, yeah, I know you. And not just in a insta love kind of way that a lot of romance kind of is sometimes, but like I've been with you for like 600 pages and we done fought dragons and we done been on life and death. We've been separated and found each other. Like we've been through some things and now we locked in, you know? Like I trust you implicitly. That's just me. I've always been a fantasy girly. I will die a fantasy girly. Like I like you reading Octavia Butler and a lot of books that we're not going to name on the podcast because I'm a millennial, so I grew up with not a lot of Black fantasy.
Yeah,
but I lived for it. I still live for it. But like you said, that brought us to being authors, being writers. And I know we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, but I feel like I do want to touch on it for our audience as well. So you mentioned that you got a 2-book deal. Please, like, as much as you feel comfortable, take us on that journey because I know a lot of listeners kind of have this dream, right, of kind of like what we mentioned before of, you find the agent, you get the deal, and then everything just kind of falls into place. And as an author, you yeet off into the sunset to live happily ever after, right? If for listeners of the podcast who have listened to like multiple episodes, they know that this is not always the case. It is, kind of a Russian roulette in some ways, but if you feel comfortable with it, I would love to talk about your journey with your books.
There's so many different ways to get published. I would champion the indie way as the best way in this environment. But I think I knew that I needed a lot of, because I had natural talent. I feel like it was natural talent, but I needed to know the business of being a writer. So that was the main reason I enrolled in an MFA. And it was very, very resourceful, very expensive, but it was very resourceful. I got so many resources, so many connections. One class I took was professional writing. And in that class, I learned how to write a query letter, how to research agents, how to research publishers. And then I used that information once I got out into the real world. Back when Twitter was Twitter, agents would post their manuscript wish list on that hashtag MSWL. And so I went on that one random day, and this is after I'd spent about 12 years working on my manuscript and 2 years of that in the MFA program. And I was just happened to find this manuscript wish list. I'm looking for Black fantasies and their website. So I was like, oh, this is perfect. So I polished up my query letter that I'd already written, polished up my first chapter, and I emailed it to them. And they got back to me pretty quickly. I would say within a month. And from getting the agent was like really eager to sign me. It was exactly what they were looking for. So it was right up their wheelhouse. They had already identified publishers that they could send the work to. So it was just a matter of getting the work market ready. So I spent maybe another 1.5 to 2 years polishing up the manuscript I had. I realized I had 4 books instead of just one epic fantasy. So I split it up. And then my agent was really instrumental in getting the 2-book fantasy deal. She presented it to her list of contacts. And like within a week, this particular publisher was like, yes, we want it. And then I knew that the book was really good. I felt like it was really good. So I wanted it to be a movie one day. And so I was like, okay, they can have the book, but I want to retain my movie rights so that I can pursue, someone making it into a movie. And they were like, no, we're going to keep your movie rights, but we'll give you a second book deal. So you will have a 2-book contract with us. And so that, I think, like, as we've seen lately, like, that's really rare. Lucky for me, my books were already written. So it only needed like a little more than a year and a half, 2 years to polish it up for the market. So that was kind of the trajectory that I went through from going to the NMFA program and using those resources to pinpoint, an agent, and then the agent doing the heavy lifting of finding the publisher. But there's so many different ways to get published now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you talked about, one, the business of writing, because I feel like sometimes people get caught up in the art that is writing. And at the end of the day, one thing that, if you haven't heard me say it, like, one thing that I say a lot is that writing is a business. When you're talking about making it a career and being a full-time author, sometimes I feel like people say that without really understanding the nuances that go in behind it, especially if you, like in my case, what I know is indie authoring. So speaking from that perspective, it's just kind of like, oh, yeah, it's fun to be able to sit down and write the book and, have I'm a struggling author. I get up and I drink 18 cups of coffee a day and I'm at my keyboard and so on and so forth, and all the aesthetic and memes that come with it. But at the end of the day, it is a business. So understanding how that works and, how to take your book from this idea that you've written on your computer into an actual finished product that you can present to people. And also just kind of like what you touched on, if you are going the traditional route and, you are trying to negotiate your contract to be like, hey, I want to keep movie rights, or, knowing what it is that you want and what it is that you can ask for, and what the trade-offs are worth to you, right? I feel like all of those things are important, and I kind of wish people talked about them a little bit more so that you can go into conversations informed. Like, I know what I got. Like you said, I'm confident in what I'm presenting to you, and I know what I want, and I know what it's worth.
Exactly.
I feel like that is the missing piece sometimes in a lot of conversations.
It's so hush hush, and it's almost like, it's similar to like talking about how much you get paid at work. Like, people, it's like they want you to keep it quiet, like the mechanisms that are in place for how people get book deals, and being the anomaly in how people typically get book deals, and if it's even worth it. Like, for example, you can submit your manuscript to a competition, and that could be a way that you get published without having to go through an agent, or just publish it yourself with a distributor and do the groundwork that you're going to do anyway to get it in markets and sold. So I appreciate that there's so many different avenues now. It's just that realizing not all of them are as transparent.
Exactly. All of them are not as transparent. And then I think also something that I have like personally seen, talking to people who have taken different paths over the course of, doing the podcast and running the Melanin Library, and just being in the fortunate position of being able to talk to so many authors about what their journeys have really been like, not just necessarily on camera, but off camera too, right? And it's kind of like, one of the things that I feel really passionate about is letting people know that, like, there is no path forward to being a full-time author that does not require work, that does not require a level of commitment, that does not require a lot of heavy lifting on your part as the author. And I know that there are some really big authors out there who are, kind of the, I'll say, shining examples of what we all want to be, where it's just like, yeah, they have the big budgets and they get flown out to all of the book tours and the book conferences and conventions and things like that. But most authors, and I hate to break it to this, whoever needs to hear this, I'm holding your hand gently as I say this. Most authors fall into that mid-list range where it's just like, you've got to do the heavy lifting yourself. That means you're not getting out of doing the social media posts. You're not getting out of the email blasts and the newsletters and all of the other things. And I think that's important to hear. Like, trad, indie, self-published, selling it to your mama. You have to be able to like talk about your book and trust in what you have created. But that is a rant for another day that I'm not going to continue to be. But that being said, for our listeners who are interested in your book, can you tell us what your books are about?
Yeah. So I started off with exploring this idea of time. What if time was a spiral instead of being linear, that it like doubles back on itself? What if, we can impact time in different moments throughout history. So then I was like, okay, if I could change something in history, what would I change? Obviously, I would make the transatlantic slave trade never happen. The colonization of Africa never happen. And then I took it even further. I was like, oh, what if Africa was a country? And then from there, that just kind of took me on like this mind exploding roller coaster of having to do a lot of research to figure out what life was like in Africa pre-colonialism, and then, you know, what it might have turned into today. So I tell the story through my main character, Etienne. She's this young Igbo girl who is growing up in a very protected, sheltered life. And in that, she decides she's very like passionate and committed to her country, which in this world is called El Kebulan. And she decides she wants to join the military to help fight for her country. And then her parents, her village, her community is like, no girls or women are joining the military in our village. So then she kind of like becomes a little bit of a rebel, does it anyway. And then once she's in the military, she begins to realize that the country is not what she thought it was, that there's a lot hiding in plain sight. And through that process, she discovers that she herself has been gifted with these powers. So the story then kind of moves from her really, really wanting this thing. And then once she's gotten it, it's like, oh no, how do I get out of this? And by the end of the first book, she has made her decision, which then the second book picks right up from. She's made her decision where she's going to stay in the military or leave. And then we then follow her with the repercussions of that decision, whether she stayed or left. And through that, we get to see this uncolonized Africa, El Kebulan. It is beautiful. It is gorgeous. I learned so much about African history that literally people don't know. For example, the Wall of Benin, bigger than the Wall of China. No one's ever heard of it. It was destroyed during colonization. Or these West African kingdoms that were so rich and wealthy, and the traditions that they had and how they might have morphed into this day and age. And then like the supernatural stories on the continent, like what stories of supernaturals were they? Like, did you know Africa had fairies? I didn't know that.
I feel like I might have heard that before, but I've never heard of it. And that's not something that not stories I grew up with, for sure.
Exactly.
But yeah.
It was a surprise to me. So Etienne about Kebulan, I feel is like, I want to call it epic fantasy, but I know there's like a page requirement for epic fantasy. And, but it's definitely a work that it's like, it's never been seen before. Like this world has never been seen before. So that was really exciting for me, creating something brand new.
I love it. I love it. And you guys, if you're listening to this, you know that there will be a link wherever you are listening to this at, so that you can dig deeper into the books, pick them up for yourself. Correct me if I'm wrong, but is the second book already out?
Yes. So the first book came out December of 23, and then the second book, Wilders of Floods and Flames, came out May 27th. So it's out now.
Awesome. And it's a completed duology, right? Or are you planning to write more books in the series?
So when I first wrote it, I wrote this really convoluted timeline. And then when I was discussing it with my agent, she was like, oh, this is 4 books. So then I broke it up into 4 books. So there's 2 more books in the series, a third and fourth book that follow the same characters in the same world, same timeline. Those 2 are not out yet. They're not under contract. So still works in progress. Understood.
But that being said, like I said, you guys get into it because it honestly sounds like something that I personally would be interested in. I love fantasy, and I love when it is a unique world, and it's one of those things where it's just like, it's a unique world, but it's also African history, and it's also, I don't know, a connective piece, if that makes sense. And it's something that it tickles my brain. And so I'm interested. I'm intrigued.
Yay. It's so funny whenever I start explaining it to people, they're like, it's like the light bulbs start going off in their heads. Like once I was talking to a girl whose family's from Indonesia, and I was telling her about it. She was like, "Oh, I wonder what Indonesia would be like if it hadn't been colonized." And I was like, that is why I wrote this book, to inspire.
I feel like as a Black author, I feel like we all at some point kind of have that wonder, that what if of like, what if this had never happened? What if Africa had never been gutted the way that it has been? What if we lived in a different world where, at least for me, my mindset is always like, what if I lived in a world where it's just like, I didn't have to like live under constant threat of duress? Like, what would that be like? And you know, especially when you get to sprinkle magic into it, when you get to experiment with the fantastical, I feel like something like that is always, at least for me and people who love fantasy in general, I'll even say, it's just like, I want to see it. I want to explore it. I want
Yeah.
to, play in that world and exist in it for a little bit. It's definitely part of the reason why I write my stories the way that I do, because I'm like, I love the world building, and it's not based in African history as yours is, but it is definitely based in a world where it's just like being Black is not inherently a crime from page one,
Exactly.
And that's why I like to say I write books about Black girls who aren't all that nice, because just like in my world, being Black is the norm. That's it. Right. And it's like, we're not dealing with skin color. We're not dealing with colorism. Like, that is not a thing that is playing into these stories. It's just like, what happens if these Black women get to be fully and totally who they are, and they're not having to modify and micromanage their personalities to make sure that they are not coming off as, offensive or dangerous or the angry Black woman or whatever. Like, they can be angry and it's justified, and they don't have to be nice to you. So what does that look like? Right. And also, like, I don't know what it is with my brain, but I'm also like, well, what if murder was also an option? Right. Because like I write like assassins and necromancers and things like that. And I'm like, yeah, they could kill you, and they're considering that as an option. So tread lightly. Tread lightly.
Exactly. Those are the worlds that I love to write and be in and read about.
Absolutely. So take us on this writing journey, because I know that you said that you were working on this book for 12 years. Well, the first one. Or all of them, because you said all of them are written, but you're writing this for 12 years. Like, what was that journey like? Because I know a lot of people have this idea in their mind of, as an author, you sit down, you write one book, and then you put it out, and then you sit down and you write another book and you put it out. And obviously that was not your journey, since you wrote the entire series at one time. But also, you took a decade to do it. And I feel like there's also this stigma with authors where it's just like, if you shouldn't spend that long on a book, and like this idea, this imaginary timeline that authors are supposed to be hitting with each book. So what was that journey like for you writing it?
Yeah. So when I first started writing it, I was working a corporate job. So I was working full time. So I didn't have like the all day, wake up in the morning, get your coffee, start writing. I would have to steal my writing time, like after work or waking up early in the morning on the weekends. So I think that's initially why it took so long. I was working full time. And then once I applied to law school and I didn't get in, I was like, okay, this is my sign. I need to pursue creative writing. So then once I realized that, this was going to be the path forward, I started working on it like nonstop. I was writing all day long. And then that's when I enrolled in the MFA program, because I was like, I need some dedicated time where I'm not worrying about having to pay bills, going to, someone's corporate job. I can just focus on getting the story on the page. So the MFA program was 2.5 years. And then after I left the MA program in 2017, I continued to work on it. And at that time I was back to working full time. So back to stealing the time. I would wake up in the morning, 2, 3, 4 a.m. to get a couple hours in, and then writing sometimes late into the night. Like, when you get like a really good idea and it's like time disappears and you just you're like in a trance state, flowing, fingers clicking across the keyboard. It was like that for me during that time period, like right before I got it published or contracted in 2022. So I would say between 2017 and 2022, it was just a lot of finding the time, stealing the time, because then I was working as a full-time English teacher. And so I think being an English teacher was one of the best jobs I could have had to get the book written, because like I was reading with my students, they were working on creative projects. So that was inspiring me. So then I would end up in those like late night hours writing. And sometimes I would be so busy with work that I did not have the energy to work on it. Like those were the times where I didn't touch it for like several months. But it would always be like in the back of my head, me thinking about the characters, thinking about the story, so that when I could finally come back to it, I had a lot to like put on the page. And then I would say what inspired me to finally send it out was I started working with a friend who's also a writer. And this was like in 2021. And we were exchanging sections of the book. And she was like, this is really good. I want to read the rest of this. And that's when I was like, okay, I got a winner. I need to get this out into the market. So then that's when I started searching, doing my research. I found the agent on Twitter, and then from there.
Went from there. Gotcha. There are two things that you said that I'm just like, yeah, I am glad that you touched on that. The first one being the fact that you took a break from it for a couple of months when life got busy, because I feel like like I said, I feel like there's this imaginary timeline, especially when you are no longer, I'll say, in your early 20s, like you're not 19, 20, 21 anymore. And I don't know, I feel like collectively on the internet, there's this idea that if you have not landed where you need to land for your career by the time you're 22, 23, then you are not on the right fast track trajectory, right? But the fact is, like, life happens and life is happening while you're writing, and you're not just an author, you're an entire person. And as an entire person, there are things in life that happen. You have a job, you have friends, you have family, you have things that come up. And so I really love the fact that you're like, yeah, you set it down and life got busy and it was always in the back of your mind and you came back to it, because that's something where I'm like, that to me as an individual, let me be very clear about this. As an individual, I'm very like, that is a mark of a true writer, when it's just like, yeah, I have to do other things, but I'm still thinking about it. And I am still planning to come back to it. Like, I may have had to set it down for life things, but I never stopped being a writer. I never stopped being an author in order to do those other things. And I feel like that's really important, especially when you do have those up and downs and ebbs and flows in life where everything doesn't necessarily go according to plan. But also the second thing that you mentioned was when you found someone to write with, because I'm really, really, really huge on finding your community, because yeah, you have to sit down and write your story by yourself. Your hands on your keyboard in front of your screen, your mind, right? But having community, having someone who's in your corner, having someone to read and bounce ideas around, and someone to be like, this is really good, you need to shoot your shots, are really important, because no one can do anything 100% in isolation without support. And I feel like finding your community is also another really big milestone of being an author and being on that track, especially if the ultimate goal is to be a full-time author, even if it's not to be a full-time author, right? Yeah. But I know that there's this perceived idea of what is an author, and am I an author? Am I an aspiring author? And it's just like, you know, when you're an author, right? Like, that's something that you have to decide for yourself. There are some metrics, right? Like actually writing a book, putting it out, whatever, right? But also, are you thinking about it all the time? Are you coming back to it? Is this your passion? Is this your priority? Are you putting your time, effort, energy, skills? Are you learning in the craft? Are you connecting, making those connections, growing, shooting your shots? All of those things are what make you an author. And I 100% went on a tangent, but I just, exactly, those things are so important. And I'm glad that you touched on them.
So important.
So that being said, since we are talking about, you know, being an author and your journey, your ups and downs with it, what do you personally love most about being an author, especially since, you know, you've had this journey and you've written this book and you've written a series like that? I'm going to give you your flowers, because that's hard. Published or not, like fully published or not, that is hard. So congrats on that, first of all. But then also, like, what do you love about it? What keeps bringing you back, even in those, I'll say, in those ebbs when you were like, I ain't got time?
Thank you. I feel like there were times when I gave up, and there were times when I was like, no, I'm not going to be a writer. I'm never going to get published. Like, let me just stick to my full-time job with great benefits and just let that be that. And it was like this burning passion inside of me that would not let me quit, for real. Like, I don't know if it's just having a really vivid imagination where I'm always thinking of like new things. Like, I'm a chronic daydreamer. I'm always daydreaming about the future and like what the future is going to be like for me. And so I think that factors into why I write, why I stay writing, even when it gets hard or it's unrewarding or, you know, not making any money from it. That like inner passion for creating and imagination and written words. Like, I'm gonna say it again. I'm a writer because I was first a reader. Like, I really enjoy reading my own work. As soon as my Wilders of Floods and Flames gets here, I'm gonna be reading it again. Like, I love the written word. And that, I think, is what keeps me pushing forward, even when the environment I'm in is not exactly hospitable for being a writer. You know, having to pay bills, market maybe not as friendly towards Black authors, those things. Like, it keeps me pushing past. Like, it's burning so much inside me that it doesn't matter. I got to get it on the page.
I feel that. Okay. So I'm going to get really honest here for a moment, because if you guys are listening to the podcast, y'all know how I feel when it comes to Black authors, because obviously this is the podcast. This is the Melanin Library. Y'all know who I am. I'm very pro-Black. I'm very pro-Black author. Okay. And it's one of those things where it's just like, I feel like we have to have more conversations about the reality of being an author and how that is different from being a Black author. And it's kind of crazy that we have to differentiate that. But if you guys pay attention to what happens in social media and what trad authors are saying about how the treatment is, right? And how it's not all cake and roses and how there is a lot to be vocal about, right? I feel like we have to continue to have those conversations, and that marketing aspect of it, that is the hardest thing for any author, but especially as a Black author, especially as a Black author writing Black fantasy. That is a specific uphill battle, and it is hard without support. So I'm going to say this. If you're listening to the podcast, please, please, please go look into Didi's books, go look into my books, go look into all the Black fantasy authors, request them at your local library. That's absolutely free. It takes you about 5 minutes to do. And as long as you got a library card, go ahead. And it helps the authors out in reach, but also in somebody's purchasing the books, which is also coins. So I'm not going to get on a soapbox, but what has your experience been like, Didi, trying to like market your book, especially since like I know that I'm going to say this and I hope that I don't ruffle no feathers, but I said this to you earlier off camera and I'm going to say it now so that everybody can hear it. Like whether you are indie or trad, like trad authors in a lot of ways are indie authors with connections. Like there is still so much legwork that falls onto them. And I will say that the exception are the authors who are the shining gems of their publishing house, who do get the big pushes and things that we see. But there are more authors at that publishing house than just the famous ones that we see all the time. So that being what it is, what has your marketing journey been like for both of your books? Because, you know, your second book is out, which means this is no longer your first rodeo.
I'm so glad you brought that up. And I'm glad you said that because I didn't know coming into this that I would be almost fully responsible for the marketing and advertising for my own book. One of the reasons I went with a traditional publisher instead of self-publishing in the first place was because I wanted access to their marketing funds. I know how expensive marketing is. I took a class in undergrad. Like, I know that this is a thing that people study and spend time perfecting, and you can't just hop into it with no knowledge of the market and start expecting to sell. So I had to learn as I went. I had to do market research, figure out channels and avenues, which I'm so glad I found the Written Melanin Podcast, because I know for a fact that I have to be very targeted with how I market my book. Just looking at the cover alone, like there's a brown-skinned, dark-skinned Black woman with an afro on it. That already is going to eliminate a significant portion of the market for me. And that's okay. That's not the market I'm going for. So for me, it was about doing the research to figure out, okay, I'm responsible for this. What do I need to do? And the first thing that came up, you're going to have to spend money. Yes, there's organic marketing and there are ways to use your network, like they say get 10 of your friends and family to then get 10 of their friends and family to market and push your book. And very soon you'll be at 1,000 books sold, right? Mm-hmm. Besides that, if you have like really dedicated, supportive family, a large network of family and friends, that'll work. But if you don't, you're in a position where you're going to have to spend money on ads. You're going to have to spend money on news article placements. You're going to have to spend money on boosting your own posts on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. You're going to have to spend money on a variety of marketing initiatives in order to be able to get your book out there. Because if you don't, honestly, my publisher has probably posted like 4 things on their social media. I went and counted. My agent posted exactly 0. So like coming into it, I didn't know that it was going to be largely up to me. And if I had known that, I would have just published it myself. Because now I have to give a significant cut to 2 other entities that aren't really doing anything for me to get it marketed. Like the books I've sold, and I've sold more than average, but I'm not a bestseller. I think a bestseller is like what, 10,000 copies?
I think it's a certain amount of copies. I want to say it's like 10,000 copies in like a week or something, like that debut week.
Listen, I don't know how much money I would have had to spend to get that, but I ain't got it. So that means the people that I've been able to reach have been entirely from my legwork. Like, for example, I was able to get my first book in Barnes & Noble. I don't know if the second one is in. And I got that done by just saying to some of my friends, hey, can y'all go to Barnes & Noble and ask for my book? And if they don't have it, ask them to buy it. That's how I got my book in Barnes & Noble. It's not anywhere
I
else.
mean, that is important to touch on because one of the things about marketing, and if you guys specifically watch the Written Melanin channel on YouTube, it's something that I talk about a lot because as an indie author, it's something that I have to think about a lot because I have to wear all the hats. And so, like you said, with that financial aspect, the thing about marketing is if you don't have money, you have to have time. That is just what it is. And a lot of people, especially when they are, still having a full-time job, or if you have any other responsibilities outside of being an author, if we're just being real, like if you have a family, if you have kids, if you like to travel, if you have any other hobby, right? And you're trying to market, generally that's one of the choice you have to make. Either you're going to spend a lot of time doing organic marketing, building up your community, building up your audience, and doing the research yourself, because like you said, there are people who study marketing. There are people who will teach you. They will put out videos and courses and everything else, but you have to have the time to invest in it, and then the time to practice it and put it into like what actually works, and figure out what do you need to take, what can stay with them, and so on and so forth. It's a skill, and it's something that takes time. It takes time. And if you don't have the time, you have to have the money. You have to be able to pay someone else to do it, or you have to be able to, pay for the ads, because if you can't do an organic reach, the opposite, or not the opposite, but the counterpart of quality is quantity. And it's just like, if you pitch it to enough people, there will be people who buy the book, but that comes with financial investment. Exactly. And so the fact that, like you said, it's like going into it, you're kind of expecting help and support. You have to have it somewhere. And the idea that you get 10 of your family and friends to get 10 of theirs, right? I think the goal is always to get things out of your immediate circle. But as an indie author, and as someone who does like a lot of studying of marketing, because I ain't got the money, it's really important to make sure that the people who are spreading out the word of your book are fans. Because the thing is that I feel like a lot of people don't talk about is they look at books in isolation. And it's just like, as an author, if you're building a career, the goal is to get to a point where someone is buying your book because you wrote a book. Mm-hmm. They are your fan, and not just, this individual product, you sold it once, and then when the next product comes out, you have to do all that groundwork again from ground zero. Mm-hmm. That's a lot. That's intimidating, and ain't nobody got time for that. Nobody got time for that.
Not at all. And it's like we make the time because we love our babies. But
so all that being said, I know that we talked about marketing and we've talked a little bit about your journey. I do want to let you guys know that there is going to be a second part to this podcast where we will talk more in depth about Didi's publishing journey and what that looks like behind the scenes. But we are coming up on the 45-minute mark for this podcast. So I have a couple of questions that I like to ask everyone who comes onto the podcast. And for you, it's kind of a two-part question because you have written a complete series. So the first question is, what advice would you give to authors who are tackling the pressure of trying to write a second book or finish a series, right? That's question number one. And then question number two is, what writing advice would you give to any new author who is just starting out on their author journey?
Okay, I'm going to answer the second part first and then the first part. So if you're a new author, I would suggest two things. Number one, reading. It is so important to be reading widely in things that you're interested in. If you don't like a book, put it down, get another one. That's the most important thing. You're going to get so much inspiration and like what ifs, questions answered, and even like modeling and mentoring of how do people, construct their story. So reading is the number one thing. Find some text, use a list, go back to your favorite authors. Even rereading some of the books you enjoyed as a kid is a great strategy to like build up your inspiration and your motivation. Second one is journaling. I believe in journaling wholeheartedly. It's one of the things I use every single day. It helps me to get my heart on the page. It unblocks me if I'm ever like worried about things in like my professional life, paying bills, things going on in the world. Journaling helps me to unblock those things. So then I can come to the page unburdened, and like the flow is a lot better. So reading and journaling are key skills, activities to do if you're a new author. And then if you're an author who is trying to get a second book written, same advice, read, journal, but then also I want to add in getting a partner to write with you, someone to motivate you to read over sections. Even if it's like, even if it's someone who maybe is not a writer themselves, I think it can be cool to have people who are not writers reading your work, writing with you. Getting a writing group going is a great way to, like, MFAs are really expensive. So gather some of your community members, an hour or two to just give each other prompts or just time to write and give each other the space of like listening to what you've written or reading what you've written. And that can be really, really motivating and like keep you going to get that second book done.
Absolutely. And y'all know that I second all of that, because take care of your mental health, but also unique community. No one does this in isolation. I know that I can't have done anything that I'm doing in isolation. And part of the reason that I am able to do all the things that I do is because I have people who hold me accountable, who show up for me, who, not only just like read over my stuff, but give me words of encouragement, but also push me to go harder when they're like, hey, you're giving like 90%, you need to give 110, right? You need people who are really going to like stand 10 toes down behind you. And when you find those people, that is really game changing for your writing and for how you are able to navigate through writing spaces. I am also going to do a slight plug. So if you guys head over to the Written Melanin YouTube channel, I do writing sprints on my channel. So if you ever need someone to write with, I do them live on sometimes Tuesdays, sometimes Thursdays. Who knows what 2025 is going to bring, but I do them for the point of community. And we do have a membership community where we do writing sprints in our Discord channel. There's usually someone writing all the time. So if you ever need accountability, that is an option for you as well. The Written Melanin community, $5 gets you in, $10 gets you into the DNF book club. And we are Black readers and writers who write together. We talk about things going on in our community from the perspective of Black readers and writers, and we support each other in all the things that we're doing. So it's a very cool community. You're welcome to it.
I love that.
And that being said, that is it for this podcast. So Didi, if you could please let the people know where they can find you.
So you can find me on Facebook, Princess Didi Charnay. You can find me on TikTok and Instagram. On TikTok at DDSA10, and then on Instagram, Didi_IAH_LAX.
Awesome. And I want to thank you again for being on the podcast. And like I said, there is going to be a part 2 of this podcast. It is going to be for members only. We're going to be diving into the nitty gritty of Didi's publishing journey. And I promise that this is not an episode that you guys want to miss. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can join the channel. If you're listening to this on the podcast, you can join our membership and get access to that exclusive episode. That being said, that is it, you guys. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Written Melanin Podcast. If you'd like to support the podcast, then please share it with someone you think may enjoy it. Join our membership on the Melanin Library website. Grab a copy of my books from my website, cmlockhart.com, or donate to the podcast so that we can continue making content. There are links in the show notes for everything, and I appreciate you guys so much for listening. Until next time, I hope all of your books are full of melanin.